paying that fee, the doctor's fee for the examination, plus the $75 fee for the medical marijuana card, continues to expand each and every month, and tens of thousands of new patients are moving into the market for smokable flower.
Yeah, I think there are many people like our caller who find it still an obstacle, when it comes to going through the process of the dispensary and, getting marijuana from one of the 22 licensed dealers that there are in the state. It's a complicated world. 11 states and the District of Columbia have legalized small amounts of marijuana for adult use, but under federal law, any use of marijuana is still illegal. So, how do you square that? And banks are still reluctant to take any money. It's kind of a cash business, and
don't they have dispensaries have to devise workarounds, don't they, John? Because of that, because they can't have a normal relationship with a bank like most other businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, Nick is probably a better speaker on some of that, how some of the actual vendors, actually handle their cash.
How they do it, yeah. Nick, what about that?
Yeah.
And we're getting tweets asking, how will this all be regulated as well?
Great. Two great questions. One, it's a little bit of a misconception that dispensaries are cash only. We are not. Most dispensaries are cash or debit. They don't have credit. The banking rules have loosened somewhat, but what it really amounts to is you are forced to use community banks, local regional banks that have a higher threshold for reporting because of cannabis. I think it's inaccurate to say that it's not bankable, because we are. Most dispensaries have relationships with multiple banks in order to process, but it does create, I think John is right, there are workarounds, and there are still workarounds that some smaller dispensaries have to deal with, and every state is different. And so you're requiring a threshold. This is not something where if you were a multi-state operator or a national cannabis retailer, like my employer, you can't have a relationship with Bank of America, but you might set up 3 or 4 different relationships with smaller banks. So that's sort of one. I think the second question was about how would this be regulated in an adult use world, and I'm going to speak specifically to our amendment. Our amendment keeps the regulatory authority under the Department of Health, and we did that, one, because they now have a track record of understanding how to test and how to look at at cannabis and understand it. We didn't want to start all from a whole new cloth, setting up an entirely new agency, but we also wanted to give the people of Florida the comfort, because I think there comes a high comfort level with looking at Department of Health as the stamp of approval, that what you are putting into your body, whether medicinally or as a wellness product, is safe and regulated properly. And so we felt that was important to keep that in the lane of the Department of Health.
More calls here. Boyce in Miami has been patient on line 1. Go ahead, Boyce. You're on the radio.
Hi, I'm a psychiatrist practicing in Miami, Florida, and I have a number of patients who've come into the medical ED from time to time complaining of psychotic symptoms, delusions, and hallucinations precipitated by cannabis use. And I find that the general public is not generally aware of the fact that there is a population of people who are susceptible to developing psychotic symptoms, even after perhaps a year of on-off cannabis use. And I just think that would probably change the conversation somewhat if people knew that there were certain risks involved in cannabis use, particularly for patients who are susceptible to psychosis or have a family history of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. But that's basically all I wanted to say.
Okay, Boyce, we get it. How about it, Nick? Should there perhaps be on recreational marijuana, if you're successful, some warning signs on it?
We do that now. We have packaging. It depends on the state. I'm sure the legislature will step in. We know that in a regulated market, I think some of the things we need to sort of bifurcate here is on the illicit market. We've seen this in the vaping issue, right? There are people who are causing deaths and things from vapes, both e-cigarettes or linked to cannabis vaping. But what they have found is that they're overwhelmingly from the illicit market. When they've tested products that have come from a regulated market, they don't have all of these other. They're not laced with anything. They are pure, either cannabis-derived oil or flour, and not filled with pesticides and all these other things. So yes, and it's absolutely important in the industry to make sure that your packaging is labeled, that you understand the effects, and that you understand what you are actually putting in. And so that's why we constantly say this is why you have to have it regulated. When you don't, you're going to push people into the illicit market where they are buying from dealers off the street who are putting all sorts of incredibly harmful and deadly additives into the product that they are selling people. And while it may be cheaper by a few dollars here and there, you are playing you're playing a very dangerous game with your life, because drug dealers don't have a third party testing. They don't have shareholders. They don't have anybody looking over their shoulder to make sure that they are on the up and up. They are there to make a quick dollar and do not care about the end use of anybody who's using their products. So it's another testament as to why we need to have regulation and why we need to make sure that it is clear and concise and labeled correctly. I 100% agree with that.